He's alive. He's alive. Thank God Almighty, he's alive. Over the years, I can't tell you how many great sermons I've heard that have fired me up with the hope of the resurrection. The hope that because Jesus is alive, we someday will live too. We will live eternally with him in paradise. Like a great pep talk, those sermons have fired me and the congregation up to hope in this resurrection life that Jesus promises. But is that all there is to Easter? Is it just a really good pep talk playing off our emotions? Is it in the end kind of like wishful thinking, flipping a coin, a crapshoot? Like it may turn out to be true, but it may not be. Like we can feel better about the hope because we really want it to be true. We can feel better in the present that it might be true by kind of ginning up all that emotion. But in the end, we have no certainty whether it is or it isn't. We won't find out until we, quote unquote, get in the game, when we actually die, and we'll see if Jesus really rose from the dead. We'll see if there's any kind of life eternal beyond the grave. Is that all there is to Easter? It's just like a great pep talk firing you up? As a baseball player, I heard many great pep talks in high school and college playing baseball. I heard some great pep talks that fired us up as a team and got us to perform at our peak and enabled us to win the game, to prevail, to do our best and therefore defeat another team, even teams that we were very competitive with, teams that were formidable. We could prevail over them because that pep talk fired us up so much. But I've also been part of teams where the coach gave an amazing pep talk, like a movie-worthy type of pep talk, and we still got slaughtered because the reality was we weren't the better team. The other team was far better than us, and they crushed us. So is Easter like that? Is Easter simply wishful thinking and not really confronting the reality that we just don't know what happens after we die? We can't know what happens after we die. One of the most realistic, honest pep talks I ever received was one day in high school. We were going to play the best team in our area and one of the best teams in the state at the time. They had a couple of kids that were major league prospects, went on to play professional baseball, and all the kids on their team were like abnormally big, big for high school kids. We were playing on their field, so they had home field advantage, which was another strike against us. So on the way to their field, to their school, from our school, it was after we played games after school got over. So it's the afternoon. We get on the bus, and normally the coach, while we're on the bus, he'd sit up front. He'd turn around and he'd give us a pep talk. He'd look us straight in the eye, each and every one of us straight in the eye, and he'd give us a pep talk and really fire us up for the game. But this game, instead of looking us straight in the eye, he just looked down at the aisle, and all he did was shake his head, and he said things like, "We're gonna lose. We're gonna lose today. We're gonna lose really big today. We're gonna get crushed." Now, to be fair to him, he may have been using reverse psychology there. I'm not sure. Maybe he was trying to get us angry that we just had no chance, so then we go out and like defy the odds. But it turned out his prediction was true. We did get crushed. We had no chance in that game. They were just so much better than us, and they crushed us. But at least he was being realistic. I mean, is it more realistic to simply say, we just don't know what's going to happen when we die? We have no certainty at all. Easter is just a pep talk that's kind of a deception. It's not really dealing with the reality of things. Well, if that's all there was to Easter, I wouldn't be standing here right now. I wouldn't be a Christian. Like many other people who came to faith this way, I didn't want Christianity to be true. And I realized early on that the whole thing hinged on the resurrection, whether Jesus rose from the dead or not. Like Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, if Jesus didn't rise, then Christianity, the whole faith is in vain. Christians are the most pitiful of people because they're believing in something that's a complete and utter lie. But if it is true, then it is the ultimate truth about all things. If it is true, then it is the one thing you can hang your hat on, the one thing that you should stake your life on. So I knew what was at stake in studying this. And what I found out as I dove into the evidence, and I didn't know maybe even just a tenth of what I know now, when I dove into that evidence, what I found was it was so much harder not to believe it was true than to believe it was true. There's no absolute certainty in anything in life, but what I came to find eventually was that you can be virtually certain that Jesus rose from the dead, that the evidence is that good, it's that overwhelming. Because there's an embarrassing wealth of evidence, because there's just so much of it. I can only give you a tiny little piece of a part of the larger puzzle. But let me give you one sample which really helped me along the way, and as I was trying to put all this stuff together. Well, one of the things that the scholarly consensus says right now about the early church, studying the early church, is that those first disciples of Jesus, pretty soon on, in fact, as far back as we can trace the historical sources, going back beyond what just the Bible tells us, but critically examining all of that and all the other historical sources, scholars right now, the experts who study this, are pretty much in agreement that those first disciples of Jesus came to believe that he was Yahweh in the flesh as early back as we can trace. So soon after his death, they start proclaiming that Jesus is the Son of God, that God now is two, Father and Son, and that God has taken human flesh in Jesus. That is astounding. See, first century Jews couldn't imagine that actually happening. They could imagine the idea of God men, humans who somehow were divine. There were pagans around them who believed in that kind of a thing. But what they couldn't imagine actually happening was that Yahweh, the transcendent Lord of the universe, the infinite Lord of the universe, could take on human flesh, and that Yahweh would be more than one person. That's kind of the heart, the essence, the substance of monotheism. That was like what their whole worldview hinged on. It's like I have a need for speed, so I love fast vehicles, fast cars, fast anything. And I can imagine, I think it'd be so cool to be able to have a car that can go 200 miles an hour and then turn a 90 degree turn. I love going fast around corners. So do like a 90 degree turn, like on a city block at 200 miles an hour. I can imagine that, like theoretically, I can imagine that happening somehow. But in actuality, I know it will never happen. I can't imagine it actually happening because I know the laws of physics, the law of gravity, won't allow it to happen. First century Jews were aware that there were others around them believing in divine human beings, kind of hybrids between gods and humans. But they couldn't imagine their God, Yahweh, actually becoming a human being. Why is that important? Why is it significant? Because what it tells us is that whatever they saw when Jesus appeared to them, when they claimed that he rose from the dead, which is what generated this belief in him as God, whatever they saw had to blow their minds in a similarly unimaginable way. It had to be something that they couldn't previously conceive of. It actually had to be something completely unintelligible to them. And the reason that's important is because we know that's something that they couldn't have deluded themselves with. There no hallucination or cognitive dissonance or autosuggestion or any of the other ways that people try to explain the phenomena of the early church, explain what happened in those resurrection appearances as not really being Jesus. Any of those other alternative explanations, they just don't hold, because what we know about those kinds of experiences is that you don't imagine the unimaginable. You don't project the mental projection of something that is completely unintelligible. And for those early Christians to believe that Yahweh had taken flesh in Jesus, their encounters with him in the resurrection appearances had to be just as unimaginable, as unintelligible, as inconceivable. And that means that they weren't mere mental projections. They weren't deluding themselves. They weren't seeing things. They were seeing something real, something completely unexpected, unprecedented, unanticipated. They were seeing something very real out there in the real world, some kind of objective reality. They were seeing Jesus risen from the dead in a glorified form that they couldn't previously conceive, and it totally blew their minds. It enabled them to take this quantum leap of faith in their worldview. It blew their whole worldview up, so that they would take this quantum leap to actually believe that God could become a human being. And that makes it exceedingly improbable, if not impossible, to explain the resurrection in any other way. You can't really explain it as some kind of hallucination, some kind of mental projection. The only way to explain it is that Jesus did actually appear to them in this completely unexpected way that kind of blew everything up, blew their worldview up in a way that could only happen if they encountered something that they never expected to encounter, something unimaginable and unintelligible to them up to that point. So when we hear the pep talk of Easter that he's alive, it's not just playing on our emotion. It doesn't make us feel good. It's not just wishful thinking. There is great reason to believe, a lot of evidence, overwhelming evidence, to believe that we can be certain that that's not just a pep talk, but that's true, that it is the most likely, the most probable thing to be true in the universe. If you're going to stake your life on anything, this is it. This is the most likely reality, the most likely thing to be true. He's alive. He's alive. Thank God Almighty. He really is alive. I pray that you had a most awesome Easter, and more importantly, that you will know the power that flows from his resurrection, the profound peace, the unspeakable joy, and the unshakable love that flows from his resurrection victory.